Hey there, my name's Mark McCartney and welcome to the What is a Good Life podcast. Over the last 3 years, I've interviewed over 250 people around this question, not to prescribe you with the universal answer, but to help you explore this question for yourself. I'm hoping the guests' musings, curiosities, explorations, and experiences will prompt your own inquiry into what this question means for you. While I'm also trying to share with you what I perceive to be more genuine expressions of the human experience and indeed more meaningful conversations. Which brings us to this week and the 97th episode of the What is a Good Life podcast. And I'm delighted to introduce our guest, Diarmuid Lyng. Diarmuid is co-owner of Wild Irish Retreats and Nature of Man. He is a former Wexford hurling captain and host on Newstalk's flagship sports programme Off the Ball. With Wild Irish Retreats, he is part of a team that is focused on the rejuvenation of the Irish language in relation to nature reconnection. With the Nature of Man, he runs retreats and online programs with men that creates a space for them to do their own internal spiritual work. He also takes teams and groups of all kinds to the woods for overnight camps that focus on connection to self, teammate, and place. In this enlivening conversation, Diarmuid shares his unfolding path of purpose. We explore experiences of truly being listened to, of generosity of spirit, receiving love, and developing self-acceptance. All throughout this conversation, Diarmuid is pointing to a greater connection with the moment, people, and nature. And we note the significance of consciously leaving space for more aliveness and wildness in our lives. This whole conversation is a wonderful invitation to reconnect with ourselves, nature, and the living, breathing, pulsing experience of life. Look, I relish this conversation with Diarmuid as he speaks with such soul, heart, and aliveness. And he is someone who clearly seems to be living his message. So I suspect you're going to take a lot from this conversation. And if you enjoyed this episode, please like, share, and subscribe if you're on YouTube. And please continue to leave your lovely reviews if you're on the podcasting platforms. Please check out the show notes below for further details of Diarmuid's work, and indeed for a link to the podcast newsletter, where you can read about the reflections that these conversations you're listening to have evoked in me. Where you can also find links and ways of contacting me, whether that's to inquire about one-on-one coaching, joining my free weekly silent conversation groups, or ways in which I can help your leadership teams foster greater trust, connection, and communication. So that's all I have to say for this week. I look forward to carrying on the conversation with you next week. And so without further ado, the 97th episode of the What is a Good Life podcast. Diarmuid, thank you so much for joining me today on the What is a Good Life podcast. I came across your work recently and I remembered the name from your hurling days, and I was just really intrigued by the work you're doing these days and even about your path along the way. So I'm very grateful to have you here today.
Thanks for having me, Mark. It's Monday morning here in a house with 3 kids now, and things have just increased very, very rapidly, very, very quickly. I was up on the Hill of Allen yesterday with a group of 16-year-olds, 25, 16-year-olds, and I had them up there on my own as well. So it was a full-on day. Came down off the hill at 8 o'clock at night, and I'm like trying to orientate myself for the week, and I'm still a bit. My wife just said to me there, "What does lovely smell of fire off you?" I still smell like the fire in the hill, so I have to come down. It takes a couple of days to come down off the hill,
Yeah. Well, I guess we can take our time with this and we can arrive accordingly. Just the first question that I asked Diarmuid is the question of: is there a question you're exploring as you move through life?
I suppose the primary one is in relation to my purpose. What is that? I suppose is too narrow a question to explore because there's so many different aspects to it, and even times where I'm not necessarily aligned with my purpose, as you might say. It's such a common thing now to say you have to follow your purpose, but I feel like there's many things that I've done that I wouldn't say were at the time that was my purpose, and yet they seem to have come in as assistance or aid now to a new and unfolding purpose. So that all of these different strands of my life are weaving together in a very natural and lovely way now, where what I feel at present is my work I feel is quite purposeful, and those strands provide great value. So I, I don't know how I couldn't be also in the same boat maybe in 10 years time, where I think, oh, that time that I was doing camps or whatever it was, maybe it's not serving this particular purpose, but there's strands weaving their way through all the time. um, and then it's more, I suppose, that leads definitely into a more personal interrogation as well of, am I living, am I living my message, am I living my purpose, am I living that life fully, or what does fully look like, or what is, when does that interrogation become criticism and excessive criticism, and start to knock the life out of me a little bit, when I feel like, I'm maybe just overdoing it on myself, and not orientated outwards enough. And I go through those periods from time to time, and they can be difficult, but yeah, I think it's all serving the mission. And yeah, they're the meanderings of my mind in relation to my mission at the moment.
Do you know what I love the feeling almost at times in life where we can look and appreciate that different strands, even if, as you say, they don't seem mission focused based on how we perceive the world now,
Mm,
have support that. And so it's not kind
mm.
of disavowing any part of us or letting go of part of us. It's all kind of been in service. Can you give us a sense just of how that's developed for you, or even, you know, just how things have kind of woven together to bring you to this point right now?
um, well, I suppose, like, teaching, for example, might probably be the first one that I can think of, where I'm in front of a group of 25 kids for a year, for 10 years straight, and so now I'm facing down a group for, and I'm able to see certain behaviors or track certain things that I would have been tracking maybe instinctively as a teacher. Hurling is obviously the big one as well. I mean, when I went down to West Kerry first, I didn't know what I really had to offer. Once I came into the artistic community down there, I didn't really know what I had to offer, because I was kind of like your, fairly typical in many respects hurler, and I didn't have the more creative sides of my life developed or established in any shape or form, and I didn't know what I had to offer them. And it turned out that hurling turned out to be an incredibly valuable thing that they wanted to learn about as well. And so we used to meet on the beach and play every Sunday for about 3 years around the time of the lockdown. I mean, in West Kerry, you couldn't. I, you're dealing with a lot of artists who are already on the edge, and for them to be isolated for 3 years. I mean, I don't know how many would have actually even come out of it. So we would meet up every week and play a hurling match on the beach. Um, and that's woven its way now into the retreats as well. And I see the amount of healing that takes place, in particular for fellas, in relation to sport, lads who might have been run out of their local club, or they didn't, they weren't aggressive enough, or they might have just, they loved playing, but they just didn't have the same maybe killer instinct, or they didn't hate the fun up the road, or they didn't buy the story that was being sold to them in some way, and then they get angry and frustrated with the game. But that's, it's kind of, I suppose, separating out the game and the GA culture. It's kind of, there's two separate things there. Sometimes we let them mold together, and so see, by just playing a game of hurling, that adults, from 20 up to 70, uh, feel the joy of play again. I wouldn't have that capability, obviously, without the mastery of hurling. And that's, I don't mean like I mastered it. There's still plenty to learn, but like, there's a mastery in my body now that I hadn't really realized was there. And so I'm able to break it down in quite a simple way, in which people can grab a hold of it, whether they're experienced or not. So the hurling has been very valuable in that context. Break down and break through, I suppose, going to, at a time where you feel like it's really lost, and at the base of things, that I suppose kicked off a journey into the East and Eastern philosophy and Eastern practice and Eastern ideas, and that I found is very beneficial, in that I understand the context in which I'm in when we're in that space of, for example, a retreat, or when I have a team up in the woods. There's some deeper truths, philosophies, ideas that I can lean on, and that I can find in myself, like even just stillness as a principle, right intention as a principle. These things that I wouldn't have otherwise met had I not gone east, even though that journey seemed like a bit of a Hail Mary at the time. Again, it's woven its way perfectly in. Like I'm even last night talking to the young fellas on the hill, we were talking about the skill of listening and the art of listening and how people improve their communication when they're being listened to. And that came from, like, for the very first time when I was 29, really feeling, as I was talking to a Tibetan Buddhist monk who I couldn't even say, I couldn't explain to the lads what he was doing, but I just felt how I actually felt. It wasn't that I noticed that he was listening very intently. It was that my communication had become exceptionally skillful and clear and precise. And I was like, wow, where's that coming from? That's usually a little bit more, particularly, when you're struggling, it's a little bit more, uh, um, don't know, could be. But this was just like, and then I looked at him and I could see his entire being was like resting on my every word. And I was like, wow, there's a much greater dance there than I would have realized. And so I'm able to communicate that then to the lads that, if you can give of yourself in listening, what you're doing is giving the lads the gift of clear communication because they really feel that you're invested. Um, when I went down to West Kerry, again throwing another bit of a Hail Mary for myself, I went down and down there. I mean, I met Siobhan, I met my wife, I met the work of John Moriarty, who's been a continuous guide in terms of going back in, retreating from the mysticism of the East and going back into our own mysticism here, our own rich culture in Ireland, and reorientating back towards what we have here. I found that to be very valuable. When I went to Dublin, I worked with SOAR, and they introduced me to the idea of facilitation, to be able to um, hold a room and to weave stories and to notice small little things going on for different people. Who holds the room, who's really struggling, who needs to let go or whatever. To begin to observe in that kind of way and to navigate the energetics of a room a little bit more skillfully, which I find also comes through, a great thread in my work now. And then working with Newstalk has helped a huge amount, or being involved in the media has helped a huge amount, because it means I can get some of my ideas out to the greater public in some way that gives me an access point that maybe I wouldn't have otherwise. And it's also, I don't have as much probably shyness or uncertainty in front of a microphone as I would have had if I hadn't have had that experience. And then in the last few years, it's been fatherhood and finding Siobhan, and Siobhan has brought me back out into the wilder places and had me around campfires and preparing food on campfires and really upping my skill set with my hands, and being able to provide for a group of 25 people on my own with just a side of a deer and loads of vegetables that they're well able to prep and do themselves, and just giving over that kind of, but understanding the running of a camp, I suppose that's been hugely valuable as well. So all those things have really combined into one thing where I now can take a team of GA players, and I know them intimately because I know, what it was like. I don't know what it's like to be a 17-year-old in 2024, but I have an idea of the sporting journey, and I can develop rapport with them very quickly because my language is a similar language to theirs. So I've probably those, to be able to hold those groups and to have those breakthroughs, to use on the retreats, the likes of a sweat lodge. I ran a stag 2 weeks ago and we had an incredible sweat lodge. Like, Jesus, just the pouring out of a clearing for fellas, like really, really going for it. And again, that's through Siobhan that I came across those things. So it's all, yeah. There's many different strands there, and I feel they're all bringing great value to the situations that I'm in when I'm working with groups.
Geez, there's so much in that. I kind of don't know where to go. There's so many beautiful things, I think, but there's just so many beautiful things and so many, I guess, resonant things as well. Even the notion of Hail Mary trips to the east for me as well. Like, they can look quite orderly in
Mm,
hindsight, if you know what I mean. But at the time, I can recall just how I felt
mm,
before I went to India for 4 months, and it was quite volatile, I'd say.
mm.
In terms of just, I guess, like, there's something really beautiful here, though, in the sense of almost like a purpose, like as a conversation with life and a revealing that goes through it and through so many aspects here. Would you mind just touching on that,
Mm.
even that experience with the Tibetan monk that you mentioned, and just the very clear experience of, wow, how that person is listening is almost, it's engaging with how I'm speaking, or the clarity with which I'm speaking.
Yeah, I don't know what. Like, I suppose he drew me in some respects, to the conversation over a ginger coffee, and myself and Sergio, the fellow who I was traveling with, were sitting in conversation with him, and he started telling this story, and he was telling one of his Eastern fables, or whatever journey he went to with whatever Guruji he was working with, and he said something like, he went up to Chiang Mai, maybe in the north of Thailand. We were in the south, about 2 hours south of Bangkok, and he went up, Chiang Mai, and Sergio was, totally blown away by the man, and he was like, "Wow!" And you went up and you walked through the forest, and across the land the whole way, and assuming this ascetic nature, and the monk just looked at him and kind of started to smile and said, "No, Sergio, I flew. Uh, we're allowed to fly, like." So the two of us started laughing, and you could see that lovely humor, and the lightness, and it's so important to see that, isn't it? Because sometimes so much of the spirituality can be a little bit heavy and a little bit like serious, and so just
Yeah,
that lightness, I suppose, drew me in a way. And then also for him to speak, like, he spoke to me very directly about, it's like, go home, take this home, take what you've learned here home, and if it's of any value to anybody, then just share it with them, or see where it meets your own culture, and see where it meets your own spiritual history, and see where those things can interweave, if that's what you want to do, like, in Buddhist way, Christian way, whatever way, it doesn't matter. It's just like, if there's value in this, share it. Um, and that was really the first time I'd heard, or was able to hear, maybe, but what I felt at the time was the first time I'd heard somebody with handling a spiritual doctrine saying, maybe some of this, maybe some of that, maybe bring that in, maybe it doesn't, maybe it does. But if it's valuable, it's valuable, and there's no two ways about that. Value is value, healing is healing. And I found that to be a very disarming kind of, just a kind of a lightness that came with it. So I suppose there was two big things that he'd already hit me with, and then I suppose he asked me for my story, um, and I can remember, I suppose, those moments where you just come into the moment, you come into the reality very viscerally and very clearly, to the point where I can see it now, as if I can see where I'm sitting, I can see my orientation, I can see where Sergio is, I can see where the monk is, I can see, and I can see the packet of biscuits on the table, like the ginger coffee, I can smell the coffee, it's a very rich memory, and what elicited the memory was just was just that feeling of noticing my own articulation. And maybe that was coming out of the back of a long period of struggle, I don't know, where I was, in that uncertainty. And so you're second guessing, or I was second guessing everything that I was saying. And I didn't feel clear, and I wasn't coming from a center point. And now I was in a position where I was meditating every day, and I was practicing yoga, and I was tuned. And all of a sudden, maybe in that moment with him, something came online that hadn't been online. That might be a possibility too, Mark. I'm not sure, but I remember thinking at the time, wow, whatever's going on in me is being impacted by him. There's something happening here between the two of us that I don't ever remember feeling this before, or noticing this before. Like, it was just a greater clarity. Now, it's like, when you're on the field, they say, as soon as you realize you're in the flow, you're out of the flow. And there was a little bit of that maybe going on, like I was in it, and then all of a sudden I was noticing I was in it, which meant I was out of it in some regard. Um, but it was the generosity of spirit. I really maybe I tend to overgive. Um, I do tend to overgive at times, and so I equate that in some ways to generosity of spirit. And I meet generosity of spirit in people more and more now in my life, and I find it to be like a. It's almost like if somebody has it, I can I feel I can work with them. Like I have business with them in some way, and if they don't have it, so it's like almost like a dividing line now. And that's not to say they write people off who don't have it, or don't want to engage with people who don't have it. There's a variety of different, we go through different periods where we don't have it. But generosity of spirit, I'm so attracted to it, I suppose. And I guess that's what this man was showing me. He was showing me a great generosity of spirit, that I'm committed to what you're saying. I'm in. I'm not thinking about what I want to say next. I'm not trying to teach you some, take what your words are and turn them into some parable from the east, or to tell you of why we're better here than ye are over there, or anything like that. He was just listening. He was just listening. He was fully in it, and he was so fully in it that I noticed how fully in it he was. I think otherwise, when you're talking, sometimes you're not quite aware of those things. So yeah, I don't know what else to say about it. I mean, that was it was certainly it was a lesson. It was a lesson, and a real moment in time.
But I think there's such an important lesson in that for people that are listening. Like just the capacity, even just to listen to someone and not be formulating a response while they're speaking, and the capacity
Mm,
just
mm,
of a really felt generosity. Usually we might even think of generosity of like a very active role or something that we can see. But as you're saying, when someone is affording you that level of attention, it can feel like a gift, very unlike something even of a material nature or something that's more tangible. And I think, just I
mm.
don't know, from my own experience of interviewing so many people around this question, or even conversations in silence that I'd be hosting, there's like there's a feeling of enoughness, I think, that occurs in those moments, because you realize just how valuable your presence and attention is, I guess. So I think I think that's beautifully described, how you kind of relayed that again. The the expression and
Mm,
generosity of spirit. It's just very interested to
mm.
see, like, how do you even, because I think that's a really rich expression. How would you even say you'd experience that presence? Not now specific to the monk, but just in general as you go through life. Like, how do you perceive that more so than other experiences?
um, well, to continue on from the last point, one of the things that I notice, we'll say, on retreat as we're going around the circle, and it's a lovely practice point for people listening as well. If you're in that space, is you're preparing to speak while other people are speaking. This, and I constantly now remind the lads, like, this is an opportunity to listen. If you've catch yourself preparing, see, there's there's something you're stepping ahead of, and you're not affording him his story. Um, and I find that has come from noticing some people who don't. Some people who, when the talking stick arrives to them, it's as if they weren't even aware they'd get a chance to speak in some way. They're just they're starting off fully
Right.
present where they are. They're not referencing anybody else, and I would consider that to be, you know, definitely a generosity of spirit. I suppose it's in responses and reactions that I would notice it most, and I'm maybe quite attuned to those things, for a variety of different reasons. But when things happen, like yesterday up on the hill, for example, there's three coaches up there and whatever, 22 young fellas, and I sent them a list and of things that we need for the camp, food, stuff like that, and they all bring. One fella brings a kg of spuds, and one fella brings a kg of carrots, one fella brings a jar of honey, whatever. And I send them the collective list, and then the individual list. I say, you need a head torch, you need something to sit on, you need XYZ. And I bring them all. Like the rule of the forest is everybody brings a little bit, so nobody has to bring everything. Like I'm not going to cart up all of these supplies for these lads when everybody can just bring a small bit, you know. So I put in a bowl and a spoon and a fork and a knife, but I didn't put a cup in. And I brought coffee and tea, and the young fellas were fine. They were drinking whatever they were drinking anyway. But the three coaches were there, and they wanted a coffee. They were up. And they were a little bit uncomfortable in the surroundings that we were in. Very, very naturally, they'd never been up the Hill of Allen before. They didn't really know what was going on, what's ahead of them in terms of the camp. And I said, "What do you want to grab your cups?" And they said, "Oh, we didn't bring them." And I mean, at the end of the day, they're the ones going up onto a hill and they're coming to a fire, and bring a cup. Like I'm after telling you, I'm not spying anything. Like but I had to spell it out. And at the same time, I should have put on the list that to bring cups. That's I'm formulating the list. And in that moment, then there's a response. And this is in a very banal thing, but like there's a response that can come, and I'm really sensitive to it. It can be detrimentally so very often, I would say, but you notice in the response the generosity of spirit, how they respond. And like by the second cup of tea, they were just like, yeah, sure, look, at you take the first third of the cup and I take the second third and you take the third, and we were just sharing the cup. And I find that to be a great generosity of spirit. Like I'm not a big you know germs and hygiene and this fear and tension of the world. Like the generosity of spirit leans out into that as well and says, like, no, like, yeah, we share that, we share this, whatever. I mean, like COVID times and the impact of that on people has been very detrimental. And so when people come with that, like, just it's not the best example of it, but there's a generosity of spirit in the reaction, and there's a generosity of spirit as well. These are the conditions. What are we going to do? That's what I find that most. Like you bring a problem to somebody, or a problem comes up, and it's like snap, right? We're in something new now because we've got a problem, and somebody like, oh, Jesus, like, wow, I can't believe you did that. Why didn't you? Why didn't you? But like, this a response and reaction, whereas other people are just like cut more from the Buddhist philosophy, and I would try to get this across the lads on the field is like just welcome everything, every mistake, everything that happens, welcome it all, as opposed to, oh, just there he is now. That's the fella dropping the ball again, and sure he did it, and his dad did it, and his grandfather did it, and they're all useless, and and they come up with all these stories like, but it's like, no, just welcome everything, like just respond and welcome everything. Now it's hilarious to be saying that because I got on the computer here, and Siobhan, I just had a row with Siobhan over where she was going to place herself with the baby while I was doing the podcast, and so I couldn't respond with generosity of spirit in it, and that happens from time to time. But I suppose it's an aspiration as well as anything else, and that's where that's where it's tested most as well. Like in it's fine out in the world at times. Like, okay, how do we navigate this? And sometimes I bring a problem to somebody, and I'm like, I'm really worried about how it's going to, like, because I've messed up or I've done something wrong, and they're like, okay, that's how it is. So what do we need to do next to make that right? What's the best thing we can do next? I'm just like, oh my God, like when people respond to me that way, it just lights me up, and I feel that that's a great generosity of spirit, but yeah, I don't know. There's definitely many examples, but that would be the first couple of things that come to mind.
Yeah, just when you mentioned earlier, am I living my message and being over, you going through periods of maybe being over critical, and just even there noticing when there may be an alignment or a falling out of it. Just really curious for you, just even how you mention, a Buddhist philosophy sometimes, and even just this complete acceptance. From your perspective, I'd just be really curious to hear, how do you navigate that kind of acceptance of self, holding one to account? Am I living my message? Is there alignment? Because I think that's a really fascinating thing for us all to come to terms with.
Mm. Mm. I definitely, like, I feel like I went into a period of struggle with where I was going and what I was doing. And probably to many of the people in my life who were close to me, at least, would have said that was already fine. Where there was something that, for me, it wasn't fine. It wasn't good enough. I wouldn't say it wasn't good enough, but it wasn't maybe on. There was a bigger story coming through, or there was some other story trying to come through, and there was a period of chaos as that came through. Like I had to sit with my family, or I had to sit in groups with my GA friends and colleagues or wherever, and be silent, because I was noticing everything, but I wasn't in the conversation anymore. I wasn't part of it. I wasn't filling my role as the role that I had, the gizzy, the character that I had created amongst these people, that they wanted me and were depending on me to give as well, because that would keep the whole thing on the same track as it had been. Um, and so I went through that period of just, that awkwardness, but a willingness as well to pull back and to just not fill it. And then after the travels and the time down in West Kerry, and really meeting Siobhan, meeting Siobhan was a very pivotal moment for me as well, because I suppose that, I think probably I could have many ideas and theories about the answer to that question, but in many regards, it was like just experiencing love. Um, like really experiencing love was a catalyst for change. Catalyst for change isn't even the right. I don't know what it is, but it was just. Like it doesn't follow a linear. That was a time where I felt that, and then that changed that, and it's continuously unfolding, but it certainly is unfolding from that point in some regard. I think maybe I had fallen out of love with hurling, which was something I had a very primal love for, and things were, I was drawing excessively on my body, maybe out of a lack of self love, in that, and so more questions were arising because my body wasn't functioning as well as it needed to be functioning, and that was, and it was probably centrally in the gut, and that was creating issues in the head, and we know much more about that. But 10 years ago, I didn't have a clue about any of that stuff, or whatever, 14 years ago now. And so, that was a big change, and I've really, I think, just finding that again. And then Siobhan introduced me to magic, and that's like love is magical enough in one respect, but like, jamming with nature, jamming with spirit, like that was that was something I didn't even know. Probably felt it in games at times. I could feel the game responding to my integrity, or the truth of me, myself, and the game of hurling were having a conversation. I could feel that at times, for sure. But when you're out in nature and, like, the sun cracks through at the finishing point of a song, or on one of our first retreats, we built a sweat lodge down on the seashore, and I was calling it, and I wasn't qualified to be calling anything about where we should or shouldn't be building sweat lodges, because I didn't know the tides, I didn't know the heights, I didn't know the times. I was green to that stuff, and 3 hours before the sweat lodge, before we were going into the sweat lodge, it was mid tide, and it was already like 7 foot away from us, and I was like, I remember I had to drive back up with a woman who wanted to go back up to the retreat center, and I was just like, okay, I hope they have generosity of spirit here, because that's gone. Like, that sweat lodge is gone. That's going to be washed away. Like, I don't know how do I, and I would go to the part of me that's like, how do I bluff my way out of it? And I would say, no, like, how do I deal with it? How do I? And when I went back down, I was greeted by the fire going full belt, and Sweat Lodge was still kind of being built, but almost finished. And Siobhan had gathered the women. There was a big group, and the men were building, and the women were around the fire, and they were chanting, like singing and chanting to the sea, to like back off and let us have our Sweat Lodge. And the cynic in me was just like, well, I don't think that's going to work. You could move to Sweat Lodge. Maybe that's a better idea. But Like with an hour to go, and that's generally around the turn. Like the tide was, um, I'd say 2 foot from the back of the sweat lodge, and it came up to maybe 1 foot by the end of it, and retreated. And like I couldn't, yeah, for the practically minded or for the cynically minded or for just the intellectually minded, you say, well, the tide comes up to there and it goes out. But like what I'm looking at, and I was, I was surfing and stuff as well. Like I was aware of the tides and how they moved, like, and I was just like, there's no possible way in the world that can't come up that far. And I see the women doing that, and then we have the response. And okay, in the cold light of day on a Monday morning, it's like, well, that's how far the tide is only going to come up, and that's just your story that you've attached to
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
But there's repetitive, like up until like yesterday, not so much maybe, but with GA teams on men's retreats and whatever, there's been times where you just know the nature has come in and said, yes, I bless the work you're doing with this. It's so clear, it's so palpable because the conditions unfold in such a way that you couldn't cultivate. Like for example, I was working with a company down in Waterford, and they were an education company, and we got around in a circle, we had a fire, we had a good conversation. It turned out one of the women was leaving after 25 years. She was she was on the panel of teachers who were going out to schools. It wasn't just teaching, but they were, that was what her role was. And I said, well, would you mind, I took out the facilitation hat and I said, would you mind just coming into the middle, to bring your chair into the middle of the circle beside the fire? And I asked the question, what has this woman brought to this organization for the last 25 years? I wanted her to be celebrated for what she brought, because I think people move on sometimes without that, or it can be tokenistic with a bunch of flowers or whatever. It was like, no, let's stand our ground here now and speak the great truths of what this woman has brought in 25 years. And after I answered the question, there was silence, and then a marching band 50 feet away kicked off that was populated, I'd say, entirely by children. There was drums, there was cymbals, there was children hollering, children hooping. You could hear the footsteps going, and we all just sat in silence and listened to a marching band play this beautiful tune that slowly descended into silence over a period of about 5 minutes while this woman is sitting in the middle of the group. And it was like, sure, what does anybody need to say to celebrate this woman after that? After something like, everybody it was in the presence of it. Everyone knew what was happening. Everyone knew that she was being celebrated by the moment, as opposed to by the head. And so, yeah, the repetition of those experiences. Geez, I really went off track. I think that, yeah, the repetition of those experiences has confirmed to me, I suppose, that, yeah, it has confirmed to me that the track that I'm on, I'm not examining it myself as much anymore because I don't feel like I have to. I'm being
Yeah.
reaffirmed, and I do need that. Maybe it's a weakness in me. I don't know, of needing some outside reaffirmation. But when you're dealing with questions like purpose and your worth and value in the world, and whether your skill set is matching a genuine need that society has, and can that be a financially viable thing? They're big questions to be in, and trusting that things are unfolding in your direction in some way, which I really believe that they are. I think my main work is human connection, how to facilitate the conditions of connection. I think that's a big, as we isolate more and more, into our little corners with the screens. That's the skill of creating connection. I think is going to become increasingly valuable. I suppose ideally, I'd like it to be the opposite, but that's where I'm at. So when I get that affirmation from, what I will say very directly, affirmation from spirit, that I'm on the right track, then I can let go of, like, what am I going to do? Like, sitting, am I doing the right thing? Like, should I, geez, I don't know. It's like, why would you waste a second even thinking about it? When you
Yeah.
were sitting there, you brought the lads down into a field, they sat on a council of stones. One fella let go of his great fucking truth, and all of a sudden the sun broke through in a ray of light and lit him up in orange. And everybody looked at this man and said, wow, look at that. Look at that. Like, Just
Yeah.
constant, and even with GA teams, even with groups who aren't believing what I'm believing, it's still coming through. And then all of a sudden, they're experiencing magic with you, and you're like, I get it. Now I get it. Now I get what you do. Now I get why you do it. So yeah, that's that.
Jeremy, you're pointing to so many, like such a wonderful connection with life itself, like an aliveness with life, like
Mm,
even
mm,
even just the,
mm,
and I fully resonate with, you know, the love of a woman, of a partner, allowing you to love yourself or to come into a bit more love with yourself,
mm.
before you're
Yeah.
giving it to yourself. That resonates a lot. But just also, even just this jamming with nature, jamming with spirit, the game of hurling, even
Mm,
responding to the quality of your integrity and truth, the tide responding to
mm,
chance, and then this lovely kind of synchronistic
mm,
moment with the band playing for this woman. And there's like, I don't know, to me, that sort of stuff, like we're deadening ourselves to life with even an overly analytic inquiry of, well, did that really happen because of X, Y, and
mm,
Z? I think in these moments, as you say, like when the sunlight's bursting through and it's illuminating this one guy, and even if they don't believe it, there's something in our felt sense of being that can't deny the the depth or the integrity or the quality of these moments.
mm. It was interesting. Do you know, Mark? It was interesting. It was interesting in a very base level. I was in Clare after the stag. I actually went in and had a few pints with the lads on the stag. Well, actually, I only had one, and I stayed in for a while because I knew I wanted to drive home. Um, but I was in, and I'm not usually out. I wouldn't be out in bars and stuff like that so much anymore. And I was chatting to this fella from the club, or I was chatting to a fella about the club, and he was a hurler. He played with Limerick, and I was chatting to him, and these two fellas walked by, and they were like, oh, like I could hear him having a cut, saying, "I nearly got the team that I worked with relegated." Or something like that, there's your man there, or whatever. And I heard that kind of in the background, and I could hear him having a go. And I'm used to that in the GA, and I don't like it. I don't like that they're having a cut at me because they feel like I'm odd, or I'm different, or I'm weird, or something like that. I don't
Mm,
appreciate that, because I feel like the things that I'm championing are like connection to self, connection to teammates, and community, and connection to place. I think they're the basic tenets of the GA.
yeah,
I think it's abnormal to be not championing these things, to be honest. Sports psychology and all these things are being championed. Why can't we champion those things? But then I spoke to another fella. I could feel it. And then I spoke to a fella who actually happened to be on the trip. He just came up to me, big, huge fella, lovely fella from played the banjo. And I'd just been talking about him that day as it happened. And it was in the quality of his response. It wasn't like, geez, wasn't that great? Didn't we have a right time? Or he didn't blather over the moment of communicating about what we had witnessed, what we had collectively witnessed. He was just like, I don't I don't know how you do what you do, but I love that you do it so much. That was his feedback. I love that you do it so much. And I'm just like, fuck, man, no idea how much of a balm that is. Like that we can feel. Like he wasn't analyzing it. He wasn't putting words to it. He wasn't describing it. He didn't do any of those things. He just left it this great space that I was very grateful that he left. That I think it deserves, which was just like, you know, I don't know. Because I don't know either. Like, I don't know either. It's like, I don't know. We
yeah,
don't know what happened. We just know that it happened, you know.
yeah,
And that's my dividing line with this work, is like the ceremony of facilitation, the ceremony of group spaces sometimes, like ceremony in the, I don't know if you come across the work of Maladoma Somé, who talks about ritual and ceremony is like like mass, 95% planned. Or if you're afraid of your product, you just roll out the same product every single time because you don't trust what's
yeah,
unfolding. You just roll it out and make sure there's no real room for any queries, because you don't believe in yourself and in what you have. And that's fine. I don't mean that judgmentally, but that's ceremony. That's the ceremony of life. Whereas ritual, there's about 40-50% planned. And you can only plan it to that much, because that's the rest is spirit. The rest is the moment filled. and you have to leave that door open, and you have to be courageous enough to leave that door open to get the possibility to jam with life. That's jam with nature, to jam with spirit. That's how it's done. Now in the modern world, that's so like me with the cup. Like I was like, those the three lads could be like, oh, why didn't you bring the cups? Like, why didn't you tell us? Why isn't the list complete? This should be a hardened product. You should have your box here for kitchenware. You should have your box here for this, box here for that. Sometimes when I open the boot, I'm not even sure if I'm going to have the fire pit. Like yeah, because I want to be in the mystery, but I want to not know. I don't want. I've
Yeah.
seen the lads down in West Kerry they take the box out, and that's that, and that's 9:30 to 10:30, and bang, 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 take that out there, boom, 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 and they've got their product, and they're selling their product, and there are commercial realities. I'm not any kind of master of that world, but like, I just love, I love not knowing. I love not being fully sure, because then I can't say this is where we want to get. I know. Imagine the thought of it even. Imagine you come on this morning and say, I know where I want this conversation to go. I know where I want
Yeah.
to end up with this conversation and the points I want to cover. All this would be lost. And it's the same as like, can I possibly imagine for a group of 25 people where we need to get to? Am I not going to use the resources and mind the resources of the vast experiences of 25 people who really want to be listened to, as we spoke about earlier, who really want to be heard, who really want to be just acknowledged? If so many people just want to be acknowledged, like, that they're heard, or that they're seen, or that then people can say, yeah, like those things that are going on for you, that's going on for me too. It's okay. And it's probably going on for everybody else as well. And then all of a sudden you can kind of breathe a little bit more deeply, because some kind of trust is restored in the world. So it's, yeah, that I kind of try to work from that point of leaving plenty of room for spirit. But you're running a gauntlet that's not always enjoyable. Um, but when it comes through, my God, man.
Yeah. This. Yeah. This is deeply resonant, and I'd be a man after your own heart then in terms of conversations or group that I'd facilitate. Sometimes I may just have a question at the start, and we'll see where it
Mm,
goes. And that could be over 2 hours or something like that. But I think there's something you said there about, trusting the capacity even of the group. And so for me, it's like, can we reveal our own collective wisdom? And because if I plan too
mm,
much, I'm not going to give pockets or space for this to be explored. And
mm,
and I think, as you say, like I think there's a deep attunement to aliveness in so much of what you're pointing to in so many different fields or areas. But that is what I think we're encountering in those moments with the group, where
mm.
I think it's
Yeah,
important for me to be nervous, and not like doubting my capacity or my ability to be present and pay attention and follow the inquiry, but I just don't know where it's
yeah,
going to go. And I think it's important that I am a little bit nervous, and even if the group could feel that, but could still see that I could hold it, or be with it or
yeah.
witness it. I
Mm.
think that's where so much of the juice of life is, that we're trying to structure and think our way out of, if you know what I mean.
And where that gets really complicated, as Moriarty says, with the dirty devices of the world, when money comes in, and I try really, I oscillate on it from time to time, but like, when people come in the door and they say, right, I've paid you 400 quid now for this weekend, so serve me, or you're holding, and I'm like, as we go around the circle and you hear from all the different fellas, and you hear some people are in their abundance and some people are really, need something or whatever. And then it comes to me, and, ideally I'm in a place of abundance as well. And I feel like I am, like, I really do feel like I am. But I also can't, like, when we go in, when you start breathing, when the breath work kicks in, or when you're in the sweat lodge, or I can't say who's holding that. Like, I don't, I think it's an offense to the moment to say I'm holding it. And I also think
Hmm.
that it's a result of a Western ideology as well, of like this kind of service economy that we're in. Is like, I want to be held. You should hold me. I've paid you.
Yeah.
You should hold me. And I'm like, if you had any inclination of how joyous an experience it is to hold somebody through what they're going through. That's what you're like. You're paying me for that as much as you're paying me for being held. It's like, and I think that the playbook, the playbook, the facilitation playbook, sometimes, like, I think I'm like, fucking, I want to throw that playbook out sometimes. Like, I'm like, no, like, okay, that's the right
Yeah.
thing to do, and that's what we should do. That's when we have to do it. I'll give you a great example, Mark. When we were in the sweat lodge last week, it was a stag, and I got the lads to build a sweat lodge from the start. I brought the blankets, they cut down, I guided them through the process. We built it, got the tarps on, stones on the fire, basalt stones on the fire, burned it for 2.5 hours, burned a ton of wood. The lads came in to the lodge, and on the second lodge they started going for it. They started opening up, and fucking, like, I was lying back on the ground at one stage, not out of from the heat. I was lying back in overwhelm from the beauty of what the lads were, of how hard they were going for it. How beautiful they were. And one fella, I don't want to say too much about it, but he dropped something big, that he had never told him. And it was a huge moment for him. It was so huge for him that the fella who started speaking, by the time he got to the end of his last sentence, a minute later, had his voice had changed, his disposition. I mean, I couldn't see him, but he was stronger, he was clearer, he was brighter, he was lighter. It was so incredible. And then I'm in that moment then of, okay, I'm holding this, so he's after letting something big go. So what I'm supposed to do now as a facilitator is acknowledge him and honor his courage and everything else. And instead I just lay there and let his words sink into me. And then one of his friends, who, like, I didn't think it was I didn't I he was one of the last ones I would have expected it to come from, but he turned around and he said, if there's anything that I've done in the course of our relationship that has not allowed you to share that before now, I'm so sorry. And I could have fucking recited the Bible backwards, and it would, like, it didn't. I had no contribution. There was nothing in
Yeah.
anything that I could have said that would have been more valuable than what he said. And if I'd have
Yeah.
put the playbook in, and when we put the playbook in the retreats where I say I have to hold here because now I know I'm the responsible one or whatever, sometimes I think that's a limitation on what the space wants and what the space needs, and it's the courage to go after what the spirit or the space or whatever you want to call it, what is being called in. I think that's I think we do a disservice sometimes to that by not trusting it. But I'm also aware that I'm on heavy territory there. There's a reason, there's a playbook too, and there's a safety and an anchoring in it, and I do respect that. But I suppose there's a wildness to my spirit. Very definitely,
Yeah.
there's a wildness to my spirit, and so when I'm pursuing spirit, I'm pursuing a wilder version of it, which is not always safe. I mean, not always safe. Not, I
No,
don't
no,
feel that it's not that the space is safe, but
yeah, but I hear that a lot. Like, I feel that a lot too. Like, I think a big part of our problem with engaging in life is that we're almost too domesticated, or we're too civilized, and
mm,
we're not
mm,
genuinely civilized or genuinely domesticated. There's a lot of, like, positioning and kind of posturing to that effect, where it's not really our felt
mm,
experience. But just to touch on that experience of somebody saying something as heavy or as deep, or letting go of something like that, I
mm,
think it comes back to the experience again with the monk. I think we have to say something. I've sat in groups before where silence has held everything together, and but people
lovely.
have known and felt it. You know what I mean? Because the attention has been as such. And I remember
Mm,
somebody before sharing something about childhood, and it was the first time I really, when you said the uncertainty, I had a preferred outcome. I was kind of tensing up at the group, saying, please nobody say anything, please nobody jump in and try and save him right now, or try to tell him it's
mm,
all going to be okay. And there was just silence. And after that, he even said himself, like, he goes, I felt incredibly held and supported by everyone in the silence. And just even that, just as you say, like it's not to tear up everything and say everything that the standard way of doing things is shite or something like this, but just
Yeah, yeah,
to
yeah.
trust some of ourselves, you know, like invite that in, because if we
Mm,
don't give space to it, we won't get to experience it. And just because you've
mm,
mentioned them a couple of times, and I've just recently been switched on to him, which is John Moriarty. Just when you mentioned even a wildness of your own spirit
mm,
and seeing some of his inquiries, could you
mm.
talk to me a bit about your engagement with Moriarty and what that's kind of brought to your life?
Oh, could I talk about it, Mark? I'd be here for fucking 3 hours, man, if I started talking about John Moriarty. Um, I suppose the biggest thing that has come from Moriarty's work. I mean, Moriarty's work came to me at a time now where I was really on the edge. I was living down in West Kerry, and I felt maybe that the folk tales and the myths might, as John would say, shelter me for a while. So I took down in the Dingle bookshop Lady Gregory's Myths of Ireland, and beside that was this book, invoking Ireland. And I suppose there's some part of me has always known that there's something, like I grew up, I suppose, maybe like you in the 80s, but very different, I'd say, as well, in some respects, in that I had red hair and I had freckles and I played hurling and I was just like a little fucking Irish chap, like, a real little Irish chap. And at that time, MTV came in and you'd Peter Andre with his six pack and the bouncy black hair, and I could see the fellas around me, were like everything bar what I was felt like it was being championed. Everything that we weren't. Ireland was going through that at that time, like, oh, it's Americana, or it's what the Brits have, or it's what, it's
Mm,
chasing this culture that was now, like, we were understanding social propaganda and cultural propaganda an awful lot more, and so we were being hit hard with it, and I was just like kind of hiding, like, all of those parts of me, like, that were like I was called Gizzy all of my life. Like, I didn't even go by Diarmuid. I had this nickname, and this thin, wispy nickname that I went by until I was 28 or 29. Even when I was playing hard on television, like, the commentators would be calling me Gizzy, they wouldn't be calling me Diarmuid. So I had put that part of me aside. I'd like buried it. And then it was only, as I went through that awakening process a little bit later, I realized that actually I'm not, I don't need to learn some other new solution from the East. It's not yoga, and it's not mindfulness, not meditation. It's not those things. It's actually the emergence of my spirit. Now, I didn't have permission
mm,
for that because I couldn't pronounce upon the great philosophies of the world and say that's right. I didn't have anybody to back that up. And then all of a sudden I opened up Moriarty and, like, oh my God. He's like, you don't need to condescend to listen to the astrophysicists or the philosophers or the lawyers or the social theorists about what the world is. It wasn't even like you don't have to believe them. It was, you don't have to condescend to listen to them. You have to trust your own spirit. You have to give yourself permission to trust your own spirit. As I'm saying it to you, Mark, it's like food in my hungry Monday morning belly. It's like food. It feels like food as I say that. Like, what a gift that was for where I was at in my life, like when he came in. And then, much of his written work is bordering on indecipherable. Like, he's not limited by words and structures of sentences in the same way that most writers are. If he feels a word isn't acceptable, like, for example, landscape, he wasn't happy with the word landscape. Like, it wasn't enough for him because it wasn't a reflection of what was happening in front of his eyes. He was retraining his eyes how to see and feel and speak and touch. He was just retraining his senses in that way. A landscape, land being an economic entity and scape being the site of vision. And he said, well, that's not nearly enough for what I'm looking at, because I'm not looking at, cubic feet of timber when I see a tree. I'm not looking at kilos of beef when I see a cow. I'm looking at the unfolding world, like that. He would say that, like, the Chinese word for a rock contains within it a movement, allowing for the emergence and the changing nature of that rock. Whereas we're kind of like, that's all it ever was, that's all it ever will be. We limit it to a quite a static process. So he came up. He would refer, instead of landscape, he would call it a tomophany. And ophany, the second part of it comes from epiphany. So this like unveiling in some way. This first part of it, I think, is wonder. So it's the what he would say is it's the continuous manifestation of wonder, the unfolding wonder of a landscape. Like it's not enough, nearly enough, to call it a static thing. It's this aliveness that's in front of him, So he would take that permission, and he would question. This is an Irish writer, I saw an Irish writer who was you know, Lawrence, and taking on God, there's a few lads' names there now that the great, like all of them, like anyone, he was taking on all of them. He was taking on any of the great theories about the world, and he was just putting his own spin on it and saying that's not, the theory of relativity isn't nearly enough because it doesn't account for this. The emergence of man, that doesn't account for this. It's unacceptable to me. The Bible, even though he was quite Christian, even though he was a Christian, he was in collision with the book of Christianity. He was in collision with the Bible, um, and he would point out where, and point out why, and point out where we went wrong. And so it wasn't that whether he was right or wrong for taking on Conrad and for taking on all of these people. Um, it was that he was willing to. It was that he could trust himself enough to do it, and so that 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 was yeah, that was a really important um, that was a really important time. And I mean, now, I just came back from the Puka Festival up on the hill of Clachta, in County Meath, where we lit the Samhain fire. I got to light the Samhain fire. Like, that's the second biggest fire in Ireland historically. The Ishnok fire is the first, and the Samhain's the second. It's the year. And we were up there, and we did a ritual up on the hill as part of the festival. And myself and Siobhan lit the fire. And then on the Sunday, myself and Courtney Ryan, the harpist and piano player from Tipperary, I took pieces of John's work, both spoken, played out his voice, and then pieces I had picked out from his books. And I would read a piece, and then Coit would respond on the harp musically to that piece, and then I would play something out on the speakers, and then Coit would respond to that, and I'd take Coit's sound and I'd respond to that, and just this, yeah, jamming of Moriarty's work and the harp and the piano. So I've definitely taken it on. There's a John Moriarty festival this year. I went down and I ran a couple of things at that, and um, yeah, I feel his relevance in terms of the re-emergence of that part of us that's just. I say to the young fellas as well, like the wild man needs to come out. Now you need to choose
Yeah.
wisely when he comes out, because the wild man can't come out in school. You'll end up breaking rules and you'll end up hurting people. But when he gets a chance to come out, you have to let him go. You have to get to know who that fella is, so it doesn't get trapped inside you. And then you're 20 and you're a little bit drunk and you're with a woman and she's a little bit drunk, and all of a sudden the wild man sees his chance, and then some damage happens, and then you're in serious trouble. Or when you're put behind a car and you're going at speed, and all of a sudden there's that rush, and then the wild man wants to get hold of the wheel, and then you're in big trouble. So if it's buried, it's going to come out at the wrong time. Whereas if you give it some credence, if you give it some opportunity to come out and to experience itself, um, I think you really limit that. And I found that down in West Kerry. That's what I went down there for in many respects. I was out on the cliffs, howling at the sea, not because I wanted to be like a wolf, or not because I thought that was the right thing to do. It was just the sound that emerged out of me, like, And then for a few
Mm.
days, I had no voice because it had fear, and I had to keep doing that. Um, and so we can all create those moments, I think, and that's why part of the reason I bring the lads to the forest. And you see them, like, as they call it, bush fire or bush television, like they're just staring at the fire. They just get lost in the fire. And I love catching the eyes of fellas to get lost in the fire, because some of these fellas are living in, new builds where you're not allowed to have new fireplaces. You're not allowed to have fires. You're not allowed. There's houses now in Ireland where you're not allowed to have a fire. You're not allowed to have a fire. The heart. It's center point of our existence almost for thousands and thousands of years, around which we gathered, around which we told stories, cooked food, and all of that. Now, like, as Moriarty would say, stop the world, I want to get off.
Right.
Yeah.
It's, I must say, I'm reading Dreamtime at the moment, and I've just listened to a number of his interviews and talks, and the story of Big Mike. The fishing's good, the fishing's very good, the fishing's fantastic, and there's something so gorgeous to me. John O'Donoghue was an invite into this as well for me, if you know what I mean. But there's something so gorgeous about going off to the east or looking for different perspectives, but in a way some of that feels a bit too spirit led and ascending rather than soulful and into the bones of my being, if you know what I mean. I interviewed a lady recently, Jen Murphy, around Celtic mythology, and we were talking even about the language and reigniting that as well. But there's something with O'Donoghue, I think, which she just, or sorry, not O'Donoghue, with Moriarty. I can wax lyrical about O'Donoghue as well, but there's something that's just so inviting about our commune with the world, like our relationship with all that is around us, and not deadening even the word landscape, and almost having landscape as this thing that you put into this category, but like feeling it, responding to it. And I think over the course of this conversation, Diarmuid, like so much of even initially this inquiry into what is my purpose, but seeing all these threads emerge. And even if the focus of it is connection with people, there seems to be, which I think often comes as a derivative of a connection with aliveness, a connection with the nature, your own nature, an appreciation of a wildness. You've even talked about your wife opening your eyes to new things, like coming into creative and artistic communities, exploring different parts of yourself, finding voice for different elements of yourself, trusting trusting the felt experience of life. Like, you don't need to worry about how other people on a cold Monday morning might interpret the sea responding to chance. It doesn't matter. Like, there's something in it that I deeply feel when you're talking, is like, I'm feeling a relationship, a conversation, interaction with a lot of things that either people have buried, tucked away, or that no longer want to question because of the sheer uncertainty that it also invites us into. But I'm sure, just based on how you're talking there, so much of that uncertainty and the connection to it is a cornerstone of a life that we feel that we're happy to be a part of. So, just given all that we've discussed there, I'm just really curious to get your answer to the question of what is a good life for you, sir?
When I come in the evenings and the chickens are locked up and comfortable and the vegetables are growing and the children are content and Siobhan is happy and I've put in a good day's work, I find that feeling to be very beautiful on a domestic level. And then there's times when I really feel like I'm fulfilling something and I'm in that space of purpose, meeting a bigger world outside of me, and that all I am is welcome. All I am is welcome, and that it's enough in the moment, or not only that it's enough, but it's perfect in that moment. That is the other time where I think this is a good life, is where all of who I am is welcome, I would say.
That's absolutely gorgeous. All of who I am is welcome. All of who I am is welcome. I think that's just absolutely gorgeous. Diarmuid, look, thank you so much for all that you've shared, all the insights or the anecdotes, and just for, I think being a sharing, like, or illuminating just what we can connect with, elements perhaps that we can re-engage with. Look, it's been an immense joy for me. So thank you very much for joining us today on the What is a Good Life podcast.
Likewise, Mark, much appreciated. I do have to go now and try and make up with my wife, who I got annoyed with before we started. But I appreciate that. And I'm
You've
also
said
not
some lovely
surprised at the
lovely
story.
things about her.
I have, and I do. But I'm also not surprised at the quality of the conversation here as well, because I'm not surprised that story came up with the monk who listened, because I can see in you somebody who listens, genuine inquiry, and then listens. And I really appreciate that. So, pleasure to be with you.